Welcome to episode number 413. And today is a very special episode because this is the first time when I interview somebody who is hosting in Japan. So that's going to be super, super interesting. So welcome to the show, Tracey Northcott, the founder of Tokyo Family Stays and also the founder of Tracey Northcott Consulting. Tracey, what's going on?
Hey, Jasper. It's a very early morning here in Tokyo, and the borders are still shut. So it's been an interesting ride these last couple of years. But I've been hosting here in Tokyo for 10 years as a short-term rental host. So I started up when there was no blogs, there was no podcast, there was nothing. I just, learned by the school of hard knocks on what was working and what wasn't. So, but I'm still here after 10 years. It's been a fun ride.
Awesome. Yeah, we're going to learn all about that. The topic for today is how to set up your listing for international multilingual visitors. We're going to touch on also how do you provide recommendations to guests when they don't speak the local language? Because obviously in Japan, I imagine most people who are not Japanese don't speak Japanese, right?
No, look, and to be honest, some days I don't even speak Japanese. So it's a really, really tough language to learn, especially if you do come from a non-Asian background. So I have enough Japanese to get me into trouble and not enough to get me out of trouble. So, so that's how I live my life. And so I really can understand the struggles of most of my guests. So, Airbnb and short-term rentals really have not been a big domestic demand. And so 99.9% of my guests, my customers, are all inbound tourists or Japanese people that have lived overseas and have really experienced, short-term rentals overseas, and so they're, looking locally here. But in terms of just pure domestic demand, it's not massive. So I learned very early on that I was really needing to bulletproof my listings for the people that were coming in, and having the experience of being semi-literate in a country where I don't read everything, I was really able to understand the struggle is real. So I was able to help, and so I learned what was really important and what wasn't.
How did you end up in Japan?
Plane. No, just kidding. That's my standard joke. So I've been here 21 years. My brother and I run a small software company. And so I'm an engineer by training. So I came to work with him in his software company, and we do education software. So mostly apps for iPhone now. But when I first came 20 years ago, iPhone wasn't invented, and we were working on PDAs, so personal devices, so small mobile devices, and also mobile online websites were just starting to take off 21 years ago. I'm showing my age, but Japan really was the place to be for that, and so that's why I came. And it just, we grew a fairly big business on very small devices. So. Wow. That was 21 years ago.
That's quite the story. 21 years in Japan.
Yeah,
a long time. So before we dive into how to set up the listing for international visitors, what's the deal with those Japanese toilets?
Well, the deal with the Japanese toilets. Well, Japanese toilets come in a couple of different ways. There's the old-fashioned toilet, which is like, and I think you had those in Europe as well, the squatties, right? You can still find those in a lot of places. So that's sort of the Japanese squatty toilets. But the newer ones, the ones that will wash your butt, will dry your butt, will sing you a song, will give you a little massage, will we'll have a seat warmer on it. Really, you don't need to leave. Like once you arrive, sit on a toilet, you're done. No, kidding. But yeah, Japanese toilets are amazing. And for the longest time, I was too scared to use them. So I understand that the fear is real, and pressing the wrong buttons and getting water sprayed in places that is very surprising is something. It took me a long time to figure it out. So when I figured it out, what I wanted to do then is explain to visitors what it was all about. So
yeah, I remember I was in Tokyo just over a decade ago in 2011, and I remember looking at the toilet and thinking, you know, you need a university degree to understand how this thing works. I mean, there's buttons everywhere, and you know, there's little lights and noises. It's very intimidating.
Label maker is your friend. That's what I've learned. A label maker and infographics are your friend. But actually, what you see now, especially in shopping centers and in restaurants, I think they've figured out that all of the international visitors really do have trouble figuring out a toilet. So there is lots more explanation than there used to be. So when I first arrived in Japan, there was barely any English. Then when I started up the short-term rental industry, like business 10 years ago, there wasn't also a lot of English. But I have noticed that over the last 10 years, just the amount of English out in the streets, at the train stations, in shopping centres has really improved. Restaurants, not so much, but certainly in the major shopping areas, they're really catering to that inbound tourist market.
So let's talk about some do and don'ts when you're serving. I imagine you're serving a lot of tourists from lots of different places, probably like US, Europe, Australia. Well, how do you adjust your experience when you're serving people who, number one, are overseas, and number two, also don't speak the local language?
Well, fortunately, there's a lot of tools around, and believe it or not, we were getting a lot more Chinese guests and a lot of Korean guests, and then there was a visa relaxing for Southeast Asian countries. So we were getting a lot of guests that were coming in from Malaysia and from Thailand and from the Philippines. It was just, the Japanese government were really trying to encourage the inbound tourists, and we were getting people from everywhere. So at first I was just putting signs up in English, that because, at the bleeding edge, like the leading edge of the guests were from the US and from Australia. And then through 2015, there was a lot more guests coming in from China and from Korea. And I figured out very quickly that it's funny enough that the toilets are the things that really are not universal. And that's what you've got to remember as a host, is that what's common for you and what's sort of like, what you think is basic information is not standard across the world. So I guess where you are in Panama as well, I mean, even things like the way that the sewerage of the city works, there are things that you can do in some countries that you can't do in others. So, for example, people that are coming in from Korea, they're very technically advanced, technology is great, but their sewage system is awful. And so the population is trained not to put anything down a toilet. So not to put even toilet paper down. So they always have if you go to Korea or if you go to Thailand or Vietnam, there is always a basket beside the toilet where people put their paper, which of course is, for us from Western countries, just go, oh my God, that's gross. But it's just what people are used to. So you've just got to keep that in mind and meet people where they're at and give them the tools for success. That's where infographics really help. So in all of my toilets, I have a sign that is in the most common languages of the people who are coming to stay with me. So I have it in English, Chinese, Korean, and Japanese up on the wall, with then pictures, nice pictures of what to do and what not to do in the places where I've found that really do need the help. And that is a toilet, because people are a bit embarrassed and you want to give them you want to give them the tools for success so that they're comfortable, and also things like kitchen appliances, using the, you can see this here, this is my standard air conditioning thing. This is all in Japanese, so most of my guests would not know how to use that. So in my little welcome book, I actually have a picture of the remote with an explanation of what all the buttons are. That's helping me as much as helping the guest, because guests want to do the right thing, but if you don't give them the right information, they're just going to press buttons, and that then of course you get breakages and you get maintenance issues, because people just don't know what they're doing. So I always think it's just good manners to give people the right information, and they then feel like you've understood them. They then feel like you've anticipated their questions, and they really do appreciate it.
Yeah, I've spent quite a lot of time traveling for Asia, and I've had quite a few of those moments where, like you were with a friend and you're like, do you understand the signs on this air conditioning? And then it's like kind of guessing. Usually the on and off button, they're green and red, so that's usually fairly easy to figure out. But then it's like, how do I change the fan intensity? How do I make the thing go more down or up, or things like that is always like really interesting to figure out how that works.
Yeah, as a host, it does take a little bit of time and setup, but that bit of time that you spend in preventative maintenance or preventative support just pays itself in dividends time and time and time again, because you don't get those call outs in the middle of the night. Oh my goodness, how do I use the air conditioner? Or, I'm cold, how do I turn on the heater? You don't get those calls when you've given the right explanations, and you also tell people, if you've got questions, go to this book first, or if you've got the online guest books, go to this page first. So you almost have to train each guest. So do the work first, and then every guest that comes in, you need to obviously give them the tools for success.
You mentioned, you have the signs in all these different languages. And by the way, I'd love to see some photos of the signs. Do you put those up in your listing?
Yeah, sure. Actually, I don't have. Oh, I could. They're around here. So so I have signs in the toilet. I have my house rules that I have stuck on the fridge. The trash recycling information. And I spent a little bit of money and had those translated, but also had a graphic designer to create something that was on my brand, that was pleasing and also professional, and then had those laminated. It's really not a big cost, but again, it will just save you so much time and stress, and also the guests will love you for it. Because we get so many people going, oh, thank goodness you understand what it's like, because they've gone into someone else's listing and they've just been left to their own devices, and then they get in trouble later on. Oh, you didn't sort the trash right. I was like, I didn't know how. So really just giving, just showing the courtesy, and not assuming that guests will know what to do.
Do you have your Airbnb listings in multiple languages too?
I have them in Japanese and I have them in English. I don't see that. I debated. We initially had them in Chinese as well, but then what we were noticing is that we were getting a lot of Chinese guests, and we weren't able to help them as much as we felt we wanted to, what was in our brand. In the old days, I did actually have a Chinese speaker on staff, and so that was really helpful. But it is really hard if you're meeting a guest and you're trying to communicate through like Google Translate. That to me is not really offering good service. So what I try to do is is hone my marketing to the to guests that I know that I can serve best. So when we didn't have that Chinese speaker on site, I actually took off my Chinese listing information. But yeah, I have it at the moment. I have it in Japanese and English because I can help people who write to me in Japanese and English. But in the houses, I have the signs up in Chinese, Korean, English, and Japanese.
So then if you want to update your listings, do you have to go back to the translator to have it translated in Japanese again?
What I try to do is I keep all of my my copy. I keep that I don't update live in my listing. So whenever I'm making an update, I actually keep those on separate documents. And that way, like what you do if you were doing a software product, you would keep the text strings in a separate document, and then every time you updated those, you could then see which translations needed to be updated, and then that way you could send it out to the translator. Human translation is not very expensive. It's not a massive cost, but it does make such a big difference. I would dissuade anybody, if you wanted to have your listing in another language, do not use Google Translate. Just don't. Just don't, because you're making yourself look unprofessional, and it's also just bad manners. I'm someone who's a native speaker of that language reads it and go, oh, they haven't really thought of me. They've just chucked it into a free language translator. That doesn't feel very warm and welcoming. You're better off sticking with the language that you're native in, and then outsourcing to a human translator. Like I said, it's not expensive to get a real human to do it. And also, I think it's just a really good signal to send to the market that I'm supporting other I'm a small business, and I'm supporting other small businesses and farming out the work to real humans.
Yeah, and I imagine that's a good way to stand out, because I bet most hosts will probably just use Google Translate, and so if you have like a really good translation, and then you would stand out a lot. Like I mean, if I would see an Airbnb listing somewhere in the world that has perfect Dutch, I would be like, wow, that's pretty incredible. And rare.
But it like I said, it does show that that you're being thoughtful. Yeah. And I just think it's also really important to remember that even though a guest may not speak your language, it doesn't mean that they're not going to be great guests, or doesn't mean that they're not going to be your ideal guest. It just means that you've got to help them out. So my business is called Tokyo Family Stays. I can help. If you're a family, I don't care what language you speak, I can help you, because you're my ideal guest. But I've just got to remember that even though you're a family, you may not speak the languages that are available. So it's my job as a good host to give you the tools. So what I try to encourage people to do is don't exclude people based on language, because there still might be great guests. There might be your ideal guest. You just have to, as a hospitality professional, just go that little bit extra to make sure that they're comfortable. And when you find those ideal guests, and you're not competing on price, you're really you're getting the guests who love your hospitality, who need your service, and you're not then discounting to get the booking. You're getting the bookings that really suit your particular product. So that's what I really try to encourage people to do.
What are some other things that you have to keep in mind when you're hosting people who don't speak the local language?
I think you've just also got to remember the humanity. I know I get a bit cheesy and a bit woo-woo sometimes, but But at the end of the day, looking after people where they sleep is a really important job as hosts. And, even though we're running a business and we've got lots of moving parts about bills and cleaning and staff, and we've got lots of that, you still have to remember at the end of the day, we're looking after humans. And it is really important that, you remember that that as humans, we're more alike than we are different. So we need comfort and security. We need comfortable beds. We need working toilets. We need shelter and food and all those things. So if you've got to sometimes you've got to take a little step back as a host and go, all right, am I taking care of the human needs, or how can I serve my guests better? Because those things really do come through. And that's where you get that loyalty, and you get people coming back again and again because they feel like you've shown them that they're welcome. So I hope that answered your question. I was going off on a bit of a tangent because I get very, very passionate about, I love hospitality. I love looking after people. So yeah, I do go off on a little tangent sometimes.
Yeah, no, I love what you're saying, because, that's how I look at it as well. In the end of the day, we think of people as in like where they're from and their culture and all that stuff. But in the end of the day, we're all very similar. We have the same needs, right? So I love how you're saying that, where you just look at a person as a human being, and that's it. And then you understand like, oh, we're very similar because we're both human beings. So I really like that. What are some, I'm just trying to think of, when you're hosting somebody who doesn't speak the local language, you touched on it a little bit, with the signs, for example, and the infographics. I think that's really cool. I imagine you also might have to explain just basic things like how do you take the subway, or how do you order food, or stuff like that. Like, do you spend a lot of time like on those recommendations, local recommendations?
Yeah, absolutely. So on my site, I've actually curated a whole bunch of links that I know that are going to give good information. That serves two purposes. First of all, it's the guests are really grateful for that information. But second of all, it gives, when you give people the tools to help themselves, they're not going to be asking the same questions over and over and over again. But what I also have is that, I take note of the sort of questions that I'm getting, and I keep those on a separate document about what are my frequently asked questions. So I keep those in a separate document, and, when I notice that there's the same questions coming over and over, and I think, oh, okay, well, maybe I need to add that to my frequently asked questions. And I have those frequently asked questions in my listing. But then also, before guests arrive, I've spent some time looking at my welcome message, my welcome pack. I give people maps. I've put myself in the shoes of my guest and thinking, well, how can I troubleshoot before there's trouble? So, and I give people exactly the right information. You get off the plane, you go here, you contact us here, and I give people the step-by-step. And I send that out just before they arrive. Giving it to them too early, they'll probably forget it. They won't remember it. They won't read it. But if you give people the right information at the times that they need it, then that's really the setting yourself up for success, and also setting the guest up. So, when you've been doing this for a while, you recognize that there's a particular arc of the relationship. So, there's the booking, there's the inquiry, there's the booking, there's the pre-arrival, any sort of regulations, getting people's IDs, getting contracts. Those are the sorts of things that I automate, because it's, like I said, it's in a standard arc. And then that frees up my time and headspace, and also my generosity, to be able to answer specific questions in really good detail. I found very early on that I was burning out by answering the same questions over and over again. So I thought, oh, hang on, I can be a bit smarter about this. I can save all of my frequently asked questions, keep them in a document, and then, over time, I would be tweaking and testing and going through my business system and my tech stack so that I would be really giving people the useful information as I know that they're going to need it, even before they knew that they were going to need it. So that, the sort of comments that we get from guests are, oh, you knew exactly what I needed before I knew I needed it. So that goes a long way in getting those great 5-star reviews, because people feel like you've anticipated their needs.
Yeah, I love that. You've been hosting for, how long is it? A decade or so?
A decade, yes. Yes.
I'm curious, like, what's the funniest story, your funniest host story? 10 years of hosting in Japan. You gotta have some funny stories.
Oh, I've got lots of funny stories. There's, of course, people get lost a lot. You know what we know. People don't, even though we've provided all this really great information, sometimes they don't read. This is like, oh my God. But I've had some great experience with guests that I often go out with guests. If they're here for New Year's, I'll take them to the temple. It's like, okay, well, we're going to the temple. I'll let people know that there's a festival going on, and why don't you just hang out at the festival? So I've met some really great guests that way. We've had guests that, of course, they lose the key, they get lost, they start climbing up drain pipes to get in. So yeah, we've had some fun stories. And most of them are really, they can come back to language, but also people, when they're in a different country, can they can either go two ways. They can either, try to do everything the right way and be very conscientious, or they'll go, nah, I'm a foreigner, I'll get away with whatever I like. So it's quite funny to see the different sorts of personality traits and how people approach coming into a foreign country.
For sure. Awesome. So let people know where they can find you if people want to travel to Tokyo or.
Yeah. So yeah, we're not hard to find. If you Google Tokyo Family Stays, you'll find our direct booking website. Obviously, we're on all the OTAs as well, booking.com, VRBO, and Airbnb. So if we mostly do single family homes. So I started off doing small apartments, but that's before regulations came in. And so doing apartments became difficult and not really what my guests were wanting. So I've really moved to single family homes now. So I really look after big extended family groups, which is very hard to find places in Tokyo for that. Also what I've been doing since the pandemic is I've been writing a blog. I've been trying to help other people around the world with their hospitality standards. So you can find me at Tracey Northcott Consulting. I have Instagram. I have all the, I'm not a woman of mystery, Jasper. I'm easy to find. So I like to help other hosts with their hospitality standards and making sure that they can maximize their profit from each individual listing.
Awesome. Yeah, we'll put all those links in the show notes, of course, at getpaidforyourpet.com. And I'm gonna take a look at your Airbnb listings because I want to see those signs. I think that's that's inspirational.
Well, I can email you a couple of PDFs that I've made that you can take a look at, and if people want to use them and grab them, that's great. That's no problem at all.
Awesome, sweet. Well, thanks so much for joining. First host from Japan on Get Paid for Your Pets. It was a pleasure having you on. Any final thoughts before we wrap it up?
Oh, I'm just looking at you in Panama thinking, oh, I really want to travel. We've been locked in for 2 years. We can't go anywhere. Our borders are still closed. So I really want to go to Thailand or Panama or somewhere where I can go and get warm.
Is there any light at the end of the tunnel?
They, we're mostly vaccinated here now. So, and I think because the Olympics have now finished, that the airlines are talking about opening up flights again from mid-December. I'm quietly confident that we're going to be open for business again in mid-December.
Great. Yeah, I think early November, the US is letting international travelers back in. I think Australia might open up in December as well.
Yeah, Australia and New Zealand are a tricky one. They're having a few battles there at the moment. But Japan is just desperate. There's been no business visas. It's not just the tourist travel. It's the business. It's the people relocating for business. It's just not happening. Kyoto, the place with all the big temples down south. Even though they haven't had any visitors, the locals are really happy because they can actually move around the city. They've announced that the city is in financial trouble because of this, and I believe that cities are going to put the pressure on the government to open up. Most of the country's vaccinated, so I don't see a problem.
Awesome. Well, let's hope we can start traveling again soon. And thanks again for joining the show. And to all listeners, thank you for listening. And we'll be back soon with more episodes. So stay tuned.
Thanks, Jasper.